We're recording. I think since I totally skipped the or forgot to start the recording for the slides, I'll do that separately on my own again, and I'll combine the two videos into one. But right, we are now discussing GitHub Actions. Well, actually, let's backtrack. I wanted to talk about GitHub first. So we had you all learn how to run GitHub command line commands. It's something that you learned in the software engineering curriculum as well. So you should be very comfortable with Git and GitHub. But we have not really been enforcing the practice of pushing your solutions to the assignment repositories, especially because the DevOps assignments are just generally a lot more hands-on rather than, I don't know, algorithmic, right? Like the software engineering challenges. So they're very different, but the option is still there for you and allows you to just get that repetition in of learning these various GitHub commands and GitHub command line commands. So we cover a bit of that today in today's README. We're not really going to dive too much into it because I think everyone should be very familiar with all of these. There might be some things in here that you don't use regularly. I think I showed you all things like creating a graph and using that to be able to see your commit history, right? There's a lot of cool things you could actually learn about Git with some of these more advanced commands. But what we're really interested in learning today, because it's new, is GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions, like I mentioned, is directly integrated into GitHub. So it's very readily available to use. And it's a simple tool that essentially works off of a configuration file. And these configuration files are called workflows. So with your workflow, you'll be able to define jobs, and within those jobs, the steps that need to be taken and what actions are going to be executed at each step. And you'll also be specifying, like, let's say an environment, like Ubuntu, for example, and that's essentially going to be the runner for your application. If we want to talk a little about events, today's GitHub Actions challenge, actually, no, we're covering events tomorrow. We are going to cover tomorrow an example of a scheduled event. This is an event where you could utilize a cron expression. Does anyone know what a cron expression is? I see a few nods.
It's something to put on a timer. You can use a timer to trigger.
Exactly. So if you use something like cron guru, you could use this to help you write out a cron expression. So this default expression here basically says at 4:05, if we were to use this cron expression inside of GitHub Actions workflow, it will trigger this workflow every day at 4:05. The other kind of automation you could use is an event or an action-based event, right? So you could have your workflow be triggered by a push to a specific branch or an issue being raised in a repository. This allows you a lot of flexibility in when your automations kick off. And you could have multiple automations as well. You don't have to, you're not limited to just one. And you'll see that tomorrow. Today we'll do something a little more basic. We'll run through an action-based events. And Then everyone will break to run through the challenges. So in this example, we're just writing a very simple workflow. We are defining a name. We're specifying what will kick this off with this on block. So whenever a push is made to the main branch, or whenever a pull request is made to the main branch, this workflow will trigger. And what it's going to do is it's going to run this job called echo job. It's going to run on the latest version of Ubuntu, and it's going to give you a message and return the present working directory. So a very simple file. And I think you actually all have used GitHub Actions, right?
I haven't.
Yeah, so the tests,
I-
the assessments for full stack had pre-built GitHub Actions for us. We never really made them ourselves.
Got it. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's see what that looks like then. It's actually pretty easy. Maybe it's not as easy to troubleshoot once you start running into issues, but it's over time as you get more experience with it, really not that bad. So let's go ahead and create a new repository, and we're going to call it, I don't know, Slackbot. We're going to create a workflow that will host to a Slack channel when an issue was raised. So let's go ahead, create this repository, have a README, so we can instantiate this or initialize it. And from here, we want to go into GitHub Actions. It's going to give you all of this, which isn't really necessary because you could just skip all of it and create a workflow yourself. So let's click on that. And here we see we can name our workflow. Let's call this Slackbot. And let's start typing out our Slackbot workflow. Okay. So one of the things we could do is we could give it a name. We call it Slack issues. And let's say it's going to trigger when an issue is open. So we're going to specify an issues key in the on block, and then we're going to pass in types of open and closed. So we're going to have a list actually, so that we could have both of those. And from here, we can start to specify our jobs. And we're going to do that by typing a jobs block. And what it's going to do is post a Slack message. Runs on is pretty much going to, at least for our examples, always be Ubuntu latest. And if you give it another name, this is optional, I think. It's not really necessary. But as you make more complex and complicated workflows, it would be good practice to set things like names and IDs. Here we could set some steps, and what we want to do is, let's name this 2. Let's pretend we're going to have more than one step. We'll just call this step 1. We could say uses. This is where we will specify the action that we want to utilize. In our case, since we want to create a Slack integration, that may not be officially available through GitHub, right? So let's look up how to do that. So let's say Slack API, GitHub Actions, and let's see if we could find anything promising. So it looks like there's an official Slack repository for sending messages to Slack from a GitHub Actions workflow. Let's skim through some of this. It's basically saying that there are 3 different ways of doing it. We're not going to worry about the workflow builder. It's a little more complicated. This talks about setting up the Slack app, which is fairly easy, as you'll see in a second. And then it gives us an example of really this is the fastest way down here. If you set up your webhook within Slack, then really all you need is a very simple configuration block. So let's use this as a reference to what we're about to create. All right. So far, we know that we want to use a very specific action, right? And that's where this example comes in. It's telling us that we have to use Slack API, Slack GitHub action version 1.26.0. So that's what we're using. And then we could say with a payload, we're going to use this with this following payload. We use a pipe to specify multi-line values inside of a YAML configuration. And here we are going to create a dictionary object. We're going to pass in some text. And it looks like this is going to utilize some variables. So I'm just going to copy paste these. It has a new line to separate the status from a URL of the request and a printout of the commit. So let's grab that. Let's copy paste. And I think at the end we had a comma, so let's do a comma. Let's actually just copy paste the rest of this. Make sure our indentations are all lined up. I'm gonna grab all this. And all right, should be good. Now from here, we want to set some environment variables. And we need this because without the Slack webhook URL, we won't be able to actually do anything. So let's see what a Slack webhook URL looks like. I'm going to look at Slack apps. It's going to take us to this website. Looks like it's going to make me sign in again, even though I've already signed in. I'm going to open a workspace. Well, maybe this isn't what I want. Slack apps. I am not a big fan of the Slack UI. Okay, let's see. I think I called it DevOps bot. Yep, there it is. So I've already created an app, or an app. Name it DevOps bot. If we go into, it's just going to take me to. All right, I think if we go to configuration, we can. Oof. I'm looking for where it's going to let me edit this application. And I think if I were to click on, this just goes to some documentation. So This goes there. Okay. Well, I always forget how to get to the right window where you can add things like a webhook. I don't know why it's not letting
Be
me do
under
that.
mean-
manage.
Yeah, you're looking for
Oh,
like
it's
slash
just-
commands.
No, that's the user.
Are you looking for slash commands, Julius? Where you can add all the like on the API side.
Let's see. I'm just not signed in correctly.
Yeah, it's strange.
I don't know why it's not letting me.
You need to be in this. I think what you're at is the Slack, but you need to be at the Slack API. So to type
I need to be able to
api.slack.com.
edit this in order to copy the webhook URL.
Yeah, this is like a different
So
managing directory than what I normally use when I'm like, this is your like the code Platoon Slack channel, but you need the
it's not
Slack
letting me
API
see
channel.
it. Okay,
There you go.
I am in the right
That's the part.
place. I had to click on build. I could have sworn I clicked on that earlier, but here we are. Now that I'm able to edit my app, I can click on adding features and functionality. This is where I would click on incoming webhooks, and I could add a new webhook to post to a new channel. So let's see if it will let us post to one of these channels. Say allow. Nice. You've got a new webhook. So let's copy this. Oh, shoot. This might not. I think I forgot the hashtag. Or it's not even showing a hashtag. We could try it. Let's see. If it doesn't work, we'll use the other webhook. So we're going to grab this webhook. We're going to go back to GitHub, and we are going to create a secret. And we can do that by going to our settings. So in the settings for this repository, we'll go over to secrets and variables. We're going to say actions, and we are going to create a repository secret. The secret we want needs to be called Slack webhook URL. So let's call it Slack webhook URL. And we just paste in the secret right there. So adding the secret, I'll now be able to access it from my workflow. All right, so where we set our environment variables, we want to make sure it's lined up with the right indentation. I believe that should be good. We are going to pass it in Slack webhook URL and the Slack webhook type. Slack webhook URL. Then we reference the secrets and we pass in the name of the secret. And then we also specify a webhook type. And if we were to go back to the documentation from the Slack repository, we'd see that it tells us to add this part here. Okay, so I think this is good. We're gonna now commit and we're gonna save. So we created this through the Actions tab. You could also manually create these though. Like let's say if you were working locally, you would just need to ensure that it goes into this file path in a hidden GitHub folder with a workflow subdirectory. This is where you will store your workflows. So I had this written out to trigger when an issue is either opened or closed. So let's see if this works. I'm going to submit a new issue. And let's head over to Actions. And we could see that our workflow has kicked off. So if you click on your workflow, you can see what's actually happening. If you click on the job, you could get all these additional logs. So what's happening? It's spinning up an environment, an Ubuntu environment. It's downloading this repository, which contains the action we want to call. And it is then executing that action. So we're sending in a payload. It's accessing the webhook URL, and it looks like it completed successfully. So if we head over to Slack, let's see. Cool. We got our success message. Any questions?
Not a question, but that's pretty cool.
Okay. So today's challenge is going to have you running through some Git basics, a few different exercises where you're going to be cloning some repositories or making your own, including one where you can play a game of 2048 from your browser. And then you'll have a GitHub Actions challenge as well, where you'll be writing a workflow using one of those repositories, and you'll be meeting these requirements. Okay, with that
Can you hear
said,
me?
I am going.
Hello, Julius. Can you hear me?
Are you guys talking? Maybe I'm
Hello.
not hearing you. What's going on?
There wasn't a lot of talking, but somebody asked a question.
Okay, now I hear you. I just heard somebody.
Yeah, there. I think Mika had a question, but yeah, I think maybe we just weren't hearing our mics.
Yeah, I don't know
I
what.
didn't have a question. I was just saying I don't have a question, but I think it's pretty cool. Sorry.
Right on. Okay, cool. I think, I don't know, maybe my audio crapped out when I played the video or something, but I can hear you all now, and I will open up breakout rooms. So let's take a 15-minute break, and let's meet back at 9 for stand down.